So the word acceptance, sometimes people can take it as it being very, very deep. Sometimes it can also be quite superficial. Sometimes you will accept things, but then you will change. Sometimes you'll accept things because someone is threatening you out of fear. Has anyone accepted things because out of fear as a child? The mother says, do this, father says, do this, and we don't accept it, but because we're going to get slapped, we say, okay, 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 no problem. So you
Es
accept.
que
And sometimes you'll accept things, and then based on your own experience, you'll change your acceptance. So this acceptance doesn't last forever. And it also means that because you accept something, doesn't mean that it's not going to change later on, you know? There are certain emotions that you'll accept in your life, but later on you'll realize, no, I don't, this doesn't work with me. Then you'll reject it. So the reason I'm saying this is because acceptance is a process. And process means it'll take time. And eventually, when that acceptance is very deep, it'll turn into surrender. So when we say accepting, there's so many different layers of this, so many different reasons, so many different emotions that will propel us to accept. I don't want to fight, so I accept. I want to
incluso,
just make peace. I accept because I'm afraid. I accept because I need the food. So whatever you say, I just accept. There's so many different reasons where we can go through the process of acceptance. So this acceptance becomes surrender because when we take this acceptance to our heart, then it becomes surrender. And the measure on whether to let it come to the heart or not, we have to gauge to see whether what we're accepting, if it is favorable to our heart and to the practice of bhakti. So it's important to understand that surrender is a very, very, very powerful tool to be free, because you're not trying to hold on to anything. So acceptance sometimes can come from the mind and the intelligence, but surrender actually comes from the heart. Because in acceptance, there is a lot of calculation that is needed, And finally, when we surrender from our heart, then we can let go. I want to give you one small story from the Puranas about what an ideal surrender looks like. So most of you know about the Mahabharata. There is this great queen named Draupadi. Everyone must have heard about her. Yes, everyone knows her, right? Yeah. Okay, so I will skip through it and I'll get to the point. So Draupadi, she was the queen of the emperor of the whole world.
mi hijo,
And her husband had gambled her away in a gambling match. It was a very dirty technique and dirty trick that his cousins, Yudhishthir, his cousins, played on him, where he was forced to gamble away. He was enticed to gamble away his own queen. So everyone knows this story, so I'll rush through it. Then she was dragged into an assembly where hundreds and thousands of kings and elders and grandfathers were seated. And this was where the gambling match, the casino was set up inside the assembly in the midst of hundreds and thousands of kings from all over the world. So when she was lost in this gambling match, she was lost to the cousins of Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir was the emperor, and his cousin was Duryodhana. So he had gambled her away to his cousin.
Donc,
I just want to make sure we have the background of the story. So she was now the property of the cousin who was extremely jealous, and he wanted to publicly embarrass his own cousins who were powerful kings by disrobing the queen of the emperor. So Duryodhana had ordered his brother to disrobe her in public, in the assembly, in the midst of hundreds and thousands of kings and elders. And she was helplessly crying for help and support. Her own husbands who were the most powerful kings of that time, they sat there helplessly. She appealed to all the powerful kings, please, oh my dear king, help me to protect my chastity. And she went to the teachers, to the elders, like Dronacharya, who was the master teacher of all the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And she even went to this great warrior, Bhishma, who was considered to be the grandfather of the whole dynasty. And no one stood by her. She was helpless. And then this Duryodhana's brother, Dushashan, was ordered to pull her sari off and publicly embarrass her. And she was holding on to her sari. She was in such a helpless situation. It was unimaginable. She was on her monthly moon cycle because she was wearing a red sari. So she's physically compromised and she's helplessly begging. And they're trying to disrobe. Dushasana starts to disrobe her. Hundreds of powerful kings watching. And she is frail. She just finished her shower. And she was holding on to her sari to protect her chastity. And as Dushasana, he had the power of 1,000 mad elephants. That's how strong he was.
Furieux.
And she was a poor queen who was frail, vulnerable, standing in the middle of the assembly. So when he started pulling, she could no longer hold on to her sari. With one hand, she cried for Krishna to help. And she accepted this is her fate. First, she used all her intelligence to garner support from everyone in the assembly. Then finally, when Dushasana, strong as 10,000 elephants, was pulling her and there's nobody and nothing she could do, then she put both of her hands in the air. And when she put both of her hands in the air, she cried to Krishna. And Krishna appeared on the spot, invisible to everyone's eyes, and provided her with unlimited saris. She cried for Krishna, hey Govinda, hey Murari. In this way, she was calling out Krishna's name, while Krishna was supplying her unlimited saris. That Dushashan, he made a big pile of saris in the middle of the assembly, that it looked like a mountain was being formed with the saris. And they were not able to disrobe her and take her chastity because she truly, sincerely, unconditionally surrendered to Krishna. So this is a story in the Srimad Bhagavatam, very beautiful story of how, what happens when you truly surrender. But this is a very, very high level of surrender. So the practitioners of bhakti, they look at the surrender of Draupadi and they bow to her with deepest respect because she has shown what real surrender looks like and how there is no surrender, there is no shelter anywhere else in the world other than the beautiful form of eternal love, Krishna. She surrendered because there was no other shelter in the world. No kings, no husbands, no powerful teachers, grandfathers. No one can provide us shelter. And the real shelter only comes when we are truly connected with our heart and that personification of that pure transcendental love, Krishna. So when that connection is there, only when we take shelter of that pure personification of love, then we can find true shelter in the world. Therefore, in the 6 principles of surrender, the first one is acceptance. Everything that is favorable to nurturing this beautiful transcendental love within our heart. And then the second principle is pratikul. That means rejecting anything and everything that is not favorable, that is unfavorable towards cultivating that transcendental eternal love in the heart. Because there is only one shelter, and that one shelter is situated in the heart. So therefore, rejecting and accepting. Only when you accept the transcendental form of that pure eternal love, Krishna, in the heart, that relishing of that transcendental love within the heart will enable us to reject other things that are not favorable. When you have something, then you can say, I don't want this. If we don't have something very dear to our heart, then we will accept everything in our heart. All garbage is welcome. So therefore, acceptance is a very important part of surrender. And that acceptance should come all the way to the heart. And then rejecting becomes easier because you have something very beautiful that you hold very dear to you. And then the third stage of the surrender, third principle, is Raksha Ishyati. That means you have unconditional faith in the protection of your heart and in the protection of your life. Just like Draupadi had unconditional faith in Krishna that he will actually be there to protect her. So that's why he let go of her sari and just put her hands up. These things are very difficult practices, but you can see in our bhakti tradition, there are many, many examples of this deep surrender. One thing that always gives me hope is the beautiful story of how when Srila Prabhupada was instructed, founder of ISKCON, he was instructed by his spiritual master, and he had no money, no possessions. He said, you must go to the West and teach the principles of bhakti. He actually came to the United States with 40 rupees, which nowadays would be less than 50 cents, but simply surrendered to the instructions of his spiritual master. And when he came, he writes very beautifully in his poetic songs that I have no idea you brought me here, and please make me dance as you please. I am just a puppet in your hands. So he had unflinching faith in the protection of the divine, and he just surrendered. And as a result, surrender creates miracles and abundance in the world and in our lives. So therefore, there are many such examples. Simple one, Prabhupada, not very long ago. He showed what it means to surrender. How many of us surrender to the teachings and practice? We hear, we get many instructions, but it's hard for us to accept and surrender. But he took it to heart, and as a result, he has created a global revolution of bhakti. So the third stage is to have faith that the divine, the creator, will always be there to protect us. He is always with us and has always got our back. So this is the third principle of surrender. First one is accepting everything favorable for bhakti. Second is rejecting everything that is unfavorable to the cultivation of bhakti. And the third is to have unflinching faith of protection that will be provided to you. Material love sometimes is very conditional. It's contingent upon many, many things. It's depending on other things, many factors. So that's why it's very hard to surrender to someone else, your husband, your wife, your father, your children, your wife. It's just very hard because there is other contaminations in that exchange of love. It's not pure spiritual love. So it becomes a little difficult. But if we truly love someone on a spiritual level, then it's easy to surrender. Like you surrender your life to your spiritual master. How is that possible? Because you have deep love for your spiritual master. That Draupadi was seeking shelter from everyone else before she finally surrenders to Krishna. There is nothing wrong. It's human to try to accomplish and do things ourselves and get help here, there. And then finally we realize, the real help is my eternal lover, Krishna. So I surrender to Krishna out of love, but sometimes it's okay to forget that we are not in love with Krishna and we are trying to seek shelter everywhere else. So it's Draupadi is teaching that through her story, she's teaching us that this is how humans are. We're always seeking, we try everything, and finally we realize that the real shelter, the only shelter is this love that I have for Krishna. And so I call out for him. So she's showing in this story that the importance of realizing that there is no much out there. There's no much shelter out there in the material world. She even tried half and half, when with one hand she's holding onto her sari, other hand she's calling out for Krishna. She's trying both. Maybe I'll have a little bit of Krishna and a little bit of my own effort. Finally, when you give up trying, okay, I can't do it. I finally give up, then Krishna shows up, Most times when we have a dialogue with God, we tell God, I know what I need and you have the power. So let's make a deal, give me what I need because you have the power. So we have a deal with God like this. God doesn't know what we need. We know what we need, what we really need. But God, you are omnipotent and you can give us what I need. And so we make a nice deal. She approached hundreds of kings. She tried every possible way for shelter. Her husbands, she appealed to her husband, she appealed to the teachers, she appealed to the grandfathers. It doesn't mean you don't try. You have to try. You have to, this is the part of the process, is that we have to do the best we can. Ultimately, we realize without that process of trying to see if there is help and shelter somewhere else, we want to know that the real shelter is beyond this material world. It's not that she was, happily going half dressed to the court. She was resisting. She was using all her powers and all her intelligence, physicality, everything she was trying. But how do you do with someone so powerful? Like Dushasana, it explains in the Mahabharata, he had the strength of 10,000 mad elephants. It's just silly sometimes when we try and we know we need to surrender, yet we think that we can still do it. That's the silly part. Like we think we can do, we got this and, we don't need any intervention. We don't need any help. That is when we get lost. That's when we take the position of God, and that's when we end up losing that battle. The thing is that yoga, the Bhagavatam is saying that we've been trying for many lifetimes. It doesn't work. So the sooner we realize it, the better it is. But that surrender has to be voluntary, not forced surrender. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a beautiful verse where Krishna tells Arjuna, He says, Arjuna's like, what if I lose this battle? He says, Arjuna, that's not your problem. You do your duty and you just leave the rest to me. Some people think that surrender is disempowering, but it is not. It is actually empowering. The real power comes from surrender because you're not holding on to anything. Your hands are free. You're free, you know? So that's what surrender does. Imagine we hold on to anger, we hold on to rage, jealousy, greed, envy, and it's very heavy. It wears on you. So when you
Imagine if
finally say, you know what, I give up all of this. When you call up that person, you say, you know what, I used to be angry with you for 20 years. I just called to let you know that I no longer have anything against you and I don't have that anger. You have done nothing wrong and I forgive you and we move forward. That freedom is just, it just sets you free because surrender connects you deeper to God. That so-called feeling of powerlessness, it creates your dependency on God, and then you become more powerful.